I was abandoned by my husband right after our wedding. When I returned home, what I found in the drawer filled me with terror. The garden was beautifully decorated with flowers of every color, creating what I thought would be the perfect backdrop for my dream wedding. I walked down the petal-strewn aisle in my shimmering white dress, unable to contain my smile. Jeremy stood at the altar in his perfect suit, and I could see his heart beating with what I believed was love and anticipation. As I clutched my bouquet of white roses, I kept thinking this was the happiest day of my life, the wedding I'd always dreamed of since I was a little girl. I smiled at Jeremy, telling him how I couldn't wait to start our life together, how I wanted to spend forever with him. The ceremony progressed smoothly, and we exchanged our vows of eternal love and devotion. The sun shone brilliantly in the blue sky, and I felt as if even heaven was blessing our union. When we sealed our vows with a kiss, the guests burst into emotional applause. I whispered to Jeremy that I'd never imagined being this happy, that I would marry him every day if I could. He looked deep into my eyes and promised to make me happy for the rest of our lives. The reception was just as wonderful as the ceremony. The tables were adorned with beautiful floral arrangements, and the band played romantic music that filled the air. Jeremy and I shared our first dance as husband and wife, moving together in perfect harmony. I whispered in his ear as we embraced on the dance floor that this night belonged to us. But then, in the middle of the party, while our guests were celebrating, Jeremy received a mysterious phone call. I watched as he frowned at his phone screen, and I noticed him shiver slightly. He told me he had to take the call and would be right back, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. I watched him walk away with growing concern. I couldn't help wondering what could be so important that it would interrupt our special night. Jeremy disappeared into the darkness of the garden, leaving me alone at our wedding reception. I tried to distract myself by talking with the guests, but his absence weighed heavily on my heart. As time passed, I began to feel that his absence had gone on for too long. I prayed nothing was wrong, that nothing would ruin our perfect day. But Jeremy never came back. My worry turned to panic, and I started searching for my husband. I asked everyone if they had seen him, but no one knew where he had gone. Deep in my gut, I knew something was terribly wrong. I couldn't believe he would do this to me, abandoning me on our wedding day. With determination mixing with my fear, I decided to search for him myself. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of my nightmare. I entered the garden searching for Jeremy, but the darkness and silence only heightened my anxiety. The garden that had seemed like paradise just hours ago now felt like a terrifying maze. Through my tears of desperation, I called out Jeremy's name, begging him to tell me where he was. I pleaded with him to come out, asking if he could hear me, my voice echoing in the empty garden. Not knowing what else to do, I returned to the party, only to find all eyes on me, waiting for an explanation. I felt lost, unsure how to answer the questioning looks from our guests. With a trembling voice, I announced that Jeremy had disappeared and something must have happened. What had started as a joyous celebration ended in confusion and worry. I gripped Jeremy's cell phone tightly, determined to find him and vowing not to rest until I uncovered the truth. I knew something serious had happened, and I was determined to find out what it was. A chill ran down my spine as I faced the horror of what might come next. Still in my wedding dress, I drove home to the house where Jeremy and I were supposed to live together. The drive was silent, and with each mile, the emptiness in my chest grew deeper. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, wondering how this could have happened, why he had left without any explanation. Where was Jeremy, and what was he hiding from me? When I opened the door, I faced a devastating sight. The living room was completely ransacked, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor. I moved forward with trembling steps, trying to make sense of the chaos before me. In a voice nearly crushed by emotion, I whispered, asking who could have done this and why. I couldn't believe this was happening. As I examined each room, more evidence of destruction became apparent. Drawers had been rifled through, clothes and personal belongings strewn everywhere. When I entered Jeremy's study, I found piles of papers on the floor. With a mixture of curiosity and fear, I began to look through the documents. I struggled to maintain my composure as I wondered what was happening and what problems I might have missed. As if answering my questions, I found a contract signed by Jeremy among the papers. It detailed his plans to steal my assets. My eyes widened as I read the words, and the cruel truth was revealed. With a sharp pain in my chest, I wondered how he could do this to me when I had trusted him completely. As I read through the documents, I realized this had all been planned from the beginning, that this scheme had been in place for a long time. The pain of betrayal and shock of finding my home ransacked overwhelmed me as I fell to my knees, clutching the documents while tears streamed down my face. Through my sobs, I called out Jeremy's name, asking why he had done this when we were so happy, when I thought he loved me. The realization that he had trampled on my love and trust cut deep into my heart. With great effort, I forced myself to stand, determined not to be completely broken. I knew I needed to take action, but the pain and confusion left me paralyzed. Would I lose everything? I wondered, trying to gather my strength. I had to understand the motives behind all of this. Still holding the documents, I searched the house for more answers. Each new item I found revealed more of Jeremy's scheme, exposing the full extent of his manipulation and greed. I whispered bitterly that there had never been any real love, that he had only wanted my money. Everything had been a lie. Determined not to let Jeremy escape punishment, I knew I needed explanations. Still shaken by the discovery of the contract, I made my way to the study. I desperately needed answers. I had to talk to Jeremy, demand explanations, understand the reasons for such a profound betrayal. I picked up the phone and dialed Jeremy's number, but the call wouldn't go through. My anxiety grew as I wondered why he wasn't answering. It seemed impossible that he could just vanish like this. I tried again and again, but each attempt failed. With each busy signal and invalid number message, my frustration mounted and my sense of isolation deepened. Through tears of desperation, I pleaded with Jeremy to pick up, saying I just wanted to understand why he had done this. Refusing to give up, I tried sending text messages, but they all came back undeliverable. I felt a pain in my stomach as I realized Jeremy had blocked all means of contact with me. This too had been part of his plan, I thought, anger and sadness mixing together. He was making sure I couldn't find him. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. I looked around the study at the scattered papers, the evidence of his betrayal. In a voice trembling with anguish, I realized I was completely alone. How could he do this when we had just started our life together? I checked my phone for someone I could call for help, but I couldn't trust anyone. I sat in my study, feeling completely lost and desperate. Who could I trust anymore, when Jeremy had deliberately isolated me from everyone? Looking back, I realized that everyone at our wedding had been from his family, not mine. In a last desperate attempt, I tried calling Jeremy's number one more time, clinging to the hope that he might answer out of regret. But just like before, there was nothing but silence. In a moment of frustration and despair, I threw my phone across the floor, feeling waves of helplessness wash over me. My voice trembled as I spoke to the empty room, saying I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I needed help, but I felt so alone. The weight of betrayal and isolation pressed down on me as I sat in my study chair. With vacant eyes, I wondered what I was going to do now. In just a few hours, my life had been turned upside down, and I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I forced myself to start making plans. I knew I needed to solve this problem, even though I couldn't trust anyone else right now. Taking deep breaths to calm myself, I promised myself I would find a solution. I wouldn't let Jeremy control my life anymore, or get away with what he'd done. As I looked at the papers spread before me, I remembered something crucial. An emergency contact Jeremy had mentioned once. It wasn't much, but it was a thread of hope I could follow. Picking up my phone again, I whispered to myself that this might be where I could start. I promised myself I would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. With a heavy heart but renewed determination, I began my journey to expose Jeremy's secrets and reclaim control of my life. I knew it would be difficult, but I was prepared to face whatever obstacles lay ahead. My eyes sparkled with fresh resolve as I told myself I would overcome this. I wouldn't let Jeremy destroy my life. I was strong. The next morning, Samuel, my faithful gardener, was tending to the plants and flowers as usual. He noticed me walking through the garden, clearly distressed. Samuel had always been intuitive about sensing when something was wrong through his connection with nature, and that day, the garden seemed to reflect my sadness. He called out to me with concern in his voice, asking if I was all right and if there was anything he could do to help. I stopped and looked at him, feeling a sudden urge to confide in someone I could trust. With trembling voice, I confided in Samuel that nothing was all right. I told him how Jeremy had betrayed me, how he had planned everything just to steal my fortune, and how I didn't know who to trust anymore. As I spoke, I remembered how Samuel had been a loyal employee for years, always honest and trustworthy. Samuel was shocked by my confession, but he maintained his composure and offered his support. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, telling me how terrible this was and assuring me that I wasn't alone. And he promised to stay by my side, no matter what happened. I felt a wave of relief at Samuel's words, though the pain of betrayal still cut deep. My voice grew weaker as I admitted that I didn't know what to do, that Jeremy had blocked all means of communication, and that I had discovered he had been planning to deceive me all along. I cried out, asking how someone could do such a thing. Samuel frowned, clearly outraged by the situation. He told me that while this was unforgivable, I needed to be strong now and find a way through this. He assured me we would find a solution together, saying we couldn't let that man go unpunished. I nodded, feeling a new resolve growing within me. Clenching my fists, I agreed with Samuel, declaring that I wouldn't let Jeremy have his way. I firmly stated that I would fight for justice for myself. As we walked through the garden, Samuel and I discussed our next steps. Samuel looked around thoughtfully, as if formulating a plan, and suggested we first needed concrete evidence of everything Jeremy had planned. He proposed we use whatever evidence we had to ensure no one could take anything more from me. I agreed, feeling strengthened by Samuel's presence. With determination in my voice, I said we needed to gather as much evidence as possible. I declared that I would face the man who betrayed me and demand answers, making sure he could never deceive me or take anything from me again. By the end of our conversation, I felt more secure knowing I could rely on Samuel. For the first time in days, I managed to smile as I thanked him, telling him how precious his loyalty was to me. I expressed my confidence that with his help, I could overcome this. Samuel nodded, determined to help me reclaim my life. He promised with a strong voice that we would get through this together and that he wouldn't rest until I got justice. He suggested we start gathering the pieces of this puzzle. With an ally by my side, I began walking the path to expose Jeremy's true nature. Though I knew this was just the beginning and the road ahead would be difficult, I was determined to regain my dignity and confidence. I felt stronger as I told myself I would definitely win. Nothing would stop me from getting the justice I deserved. I was sitting in my living room, trying to organize the remaining papers and my thoughts, when the doorbell rang. My heart started racing as I got up to answer it, imagining that Jeremy might have returned and I could finally get some answers. Instead, I found two men with stern faces standing at my door, their presence ominous and unsettling. One of them asked in a cold voice if Jeremy was available. I felt my heart pounding even faster as I told them he wasn't here, asking who they were. Without identifying themselves, they said they needed to discuss the debts Jeremy had left behind. A chill ran down my spine at their words. I tried to maintain my composure as I asked about these debts, explaining that Jeremy had never mentioned anything about them. The men exchanged glances before pushing their way uninvited through my door. One of them handed me a folder stuffed with documents, telling me I was involved in a massive debt scheme and that Jeremy had said I would pay his debts. His voice grew harsh as he declared that my husband had left enormous debts in my name, and I had to pay them and accept the consequences. I began looking through the papers, my anxiety and fear growing with each page I turned. With a trembling voice, I protested that this was a misunderstanding, that I hadn't signed any of these documents. I insisted that I knew nothing about this, that Jeremy had deceived me too. But the debt collectors showed no sympathy. The second man declared with a contemptuous look that my knowledge or consent didn't matter to them. What mattered was that I had to pay these debts, as they couldn't afford to take losses. I felt waves of despair washing over me. Clutching the papers tightly, I told them I had no way to pay these debts, that I was a victim in this situation too. I tried to explain, but the men laughed off my explanations. One of them sneered, saying everyone claims the same thing, that they didn't take out loans, that they don't know what's happening. He told me with cold eyes that I was now responsible for these debts, and if I didn't pay, I would suffer, warning that things could get very painful for me. Humiliation and fear mixed inside me as I begged for time to resolve this, to find Jeremy. I pleaded that I needed to understand what had happened and find a solution. The men exchanged glances again before one coldly responded. He threatened that they would give me 1 week to start payments, and if I couldn't do that, they would take harsher measures, and I wouldn't want those options. I felt the ground disappearing beneath my feet. I desperately tried not to collapse in front of them as I protested that a week was impossible, that he had taken everything from me. In a faint voice, I said I needed to find a way out of this situation, pleading for just a little sympathy. But the debt collectors showed no empathy once again. One of the collectors left with a sarcastic smile, telling me that sympathy for people like me wouldn't pay their bills. The other one repeated their warning before leaving, reminding me I had 1 week and not to forget the deadline. I stood there alone, clutching the papers, feeling more humiliated and betrayed than ever before in my life. I sank onto the sofa as tears rolled down my cheeks. I wondered how this could have happened, how Jeremy could have done this to me, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on my shoulders. Not only had Jeremy destroyed my heart, but he had also destroyed my financial life, and I questioned how I could possibly solve this while knowing I needed to act quickly. Wiping away my tears, I told myself I would fight and not give up, that I didn't deserve this because I had always done the right thing. I wouldn't let him ruin my life. With renewed determination, I began making a list of actions I needed to take. As I jotted down ideas on paper, I knew I needed to gather all possible evidence against Jeremy. Though I knew the path ahead would be difficult, I refused to give up. Staring at the pile of documents, I promised myself I would find a way out of this situation. I prepared myself for another battle to reclaim my life and restore my honor. I felt my inner strength and determination growing as I told myself I would definitely succeed, that I had to succeed. I whispered to myself that Jeremy wouldn't win. The next day, Samuel and I headed to a well-known lawyer's office in the city, hoping to find a solution to the financial problems Jeremy had left behind. I was nervous, still feeling the weight of the debts and the collector's threats on my shoulders. With a trembling voice, I asked Samuel if he thought we could get any help, admitting I didn't know how to face all this alone. Samuel looked at me intently and assured me we would find a way, saying we couldn't let injustice win. He expressed confidence that this lawyer would help us, insisting that we had to do something. We entered the office together. In the solemn and professional atmosphere, we hoped the lawyer would give us some hope. A middle-aged lawyer with a serious expression greeted us and listened carefully to my story. After hearing everything, he told me it was a complicated situation. He regretfully informed me that he couldn't help, explaining there was no guaranteed evidence and that as my husband, Jeremy had rights to my property after marriage. I felt waves of fear coursing through my body. Trying to maintain my composure, I asked if he was certain if there was really no way to get my money back. The lawyer firmly apologized again, offering no hope. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Through my tears, I wondered how Jeremy could have done this to me, after I had trusted him so completely. Looking at Samuel and the lawyer, I felt the pain of fear but was grateful that I wasn't completely alone, that I still had people I could rely on. In a weak voice, I thanked Samuel for being there with me. I told him that without his support, I wouldn't have known what to do. Despite being rejected and facing the complexity of the process, I knew I had to keep fighting. I tried to gather my strength, telling myself I had to believe there was a way out. I couldn't let him win. I thought that if we could gather more concrete evidence, we might be able to resolve this situation. As we left the office, I still felt the weight of the challenges ahead. I felt a little stronger as I thanked Samuel again for being with me today. I told him that although we still had much to do, I wouldn't give up. Samuel nodded with determination, assuring me we would definitely succeed, taking it one step at a time and telling me to rely on him. I knew the road ahead would be long, but I was prepared to face each challenge with courage and determination. I felt my strength returning as I told myself I would overcome this. I would reclaim my life, no matter how long it took. While trying to organize my thoughts at home after the devastating meeting with the lawyer, my phone rang. It was from an old friend named Melinda, someone I deeply trusted. With a voice full of concern, she told me we needed to talk urgently, saying she didn't know how to begin. I felt a chill run down my spine. Fearing the worst, I asked her what was wrong and if she could come over. A few minutes later, Melinda arrived at my house looking as if she carried a heavy burden. We sat in the living room and I could see hesitation in my friend's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Melinda began by saying she had discovered something about Jeremy. She told me she had seen him with another woman at an upscale restaurant, with her own eyes. I felt the world crumbling around me. With a trembling voice, I asked what she meant about him being with another woman. Shocked to discover my husband was a completely different person than I thought, I asked if she was absolutely certain. They looked intimate, she said, and there was no doubt they were together. She told me she had to let me know the truth, explaining that she wouldn't want any woman to be deceived by a man like that. I felt the bitter sting of betrayal once again, as tears began rolling down my cheeks. "He's destroyed me in every possible way," I whispered through my tears. I couldn't understand how I would endure this pain, with each day bringing new revelations about a side of Jeremy I had never known. Melinda's confession made me question every decision I had ever made in my life. I had married a man who had never loved me, who only wanted my money. What a fool I had been to trust him so completely. Melinda tried to comfort me, grasping my hand tightly as she explained that I couldn't have known. She reminded me that Jeremy had fooled everyone, and none of us could have imagined he was such a skilled liar. She encouraged me to be strong and move forward, her voice gentle but firm. I struggled to accept this new reality, my heart heavy with the weight of both financial and emotional betrayal. I asked myself over and over, why I had been so blind, why I hadn't seen the kind of man he truly was. Melinda continued to support me, assuring me that I wasn't alone. She promised we would get through this together, her presence a small comfort in my world of pain. The betrayal felt unbearable. I had given this man years of my life, only to be stabbed in the back. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if somehow this was my fault. But Melinda shook her head firmly, telling me I was not to blame. She insisted that Jeremy was the only one responsible for this situation. She told me it was time to rebuild my life, reminding me that he hadn't won. As we continued talking, I felt a new determination growing within me. I wiped my tears away, knowing I couldn't let him destroy my life. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for everyone who believed in me. Melinda smiled as she noticed the change in me, telling me I was stronger than I realized. She assured me I would overcome this challenge. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to face each challenge head-on. I would find a way to reclaim my life, no matter what it took. I could feel the determination burning in my eyes as I made this silent promise to myself. Melinda gripped my hand tightly, responding to my newfound fighting spirit. She promised we would face everything together. Though the revelation about Jeremy and the other woman had been devastating, it had also ignited something within me. If Jeremy thought he could take everything from me and that I wouldn't recover, he was gravely mistaken. I had built everything by myself once, and I knew I could build it again from scratch. I felt my strength returning as I reminded myself that I had the right to be happy, and I would fight for that right. Melinda hugged me and offered all the support she could give. She promised to keep investigating and let me know if she discovered anything else, emphasizing that the most important thing was that I could rely on her. With Melinda's support and my renewed determination, I began planning my next moves. I needed to repay the debts and start rebuilding, and I would make him pay for everything he had done to me. I felt stronger with each passing moment as I prepared myself for this new battle to reclaim my life and dignity.
The next day, while Brianna was at the bank, Samuel was tenderly tending to the garden as he always did. The sun hung high in the cloudless sky, a gentle breeze rustling through the manicured trees. Samuel focused intently on his work, trying to keep his mind off Brianna's troubles and Jeremy's betrayal. As he trimmed the hedges, he reminded himself to stay strong for Brianna, knowing she needed him now more than ever. Suddenly, Samuel heard heavy footsteps behind him. Before he could turn, two burly men grabbed him, the same debt collectors who had threatened Brianna. One yanked him by the neck, growling that they had a message for his employer. Samuel struggled to break free, but the men were too strong. He thrashed and shouted, demanding to know their purpose and to release him. The men slammed Samuel to the ground and began beating him mercilessly. One man threatened that Brianna owed an enormous debt, and if she didn't pay, everyone around her would suffer. The other man continued the assault relentlessly. Despite the pain spreading through his body, Samuel's resolve to protect Brianna remained unshaken. Through each painful blow, he told them they couldn't intimidate her. Even in his agony, he believed Brianna was stronger than they imagined. The violence continued for several minutes, with Samuel's unbearable pain intensifying. He knew he had to endure this. Samuel needed to show those attackers that our own courage would not be so easily frustrated. Through the throbbing pain, he believed Brianna would find a way to repay the debt, and he was determined to help her no matter what. Finally, exhausted from their assault, the men left Samuel bleeding and broken on the ground. One delivered a final kick, warning this was just a message, things would get worse without payment. As they walked away, Samuel groaned in pain but kept his inner flame of determination burning. Trying to stand, he whispered that he wouldn't give up, that he had to stay strong for Brianna. He reminded himself that she had always been a good employer, and now she needed his support. After tremendous effort, Samuel managed to crawl to the house's veranda. Each movement sent waves of excruciating pain through his body, but he couldn't stop. Gasping for breath, he knew he had to call for help, refusing to let those men win. Finally reaching the phone, he called emergency services with trembling hands. In a weak voice, he requested an ambulance, explaining he'd been attacked at work and needed urgent assistance. While waiting for the ambulance, Samuel reflected on his loyalty to Brianna. Struggling to maintain consciousness, he thought about how she had always treated him with respect and kindness. He knew he couldn't leave her alone in this fight. Despite the intense pain, Samuel's determination to continue helping Brianna kept him awake. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics found him in critical condition. They began immediate treatment, saying they needed to transport him to the hospital right away. Samuel nodded as they lifted him onto the stretcher. Through the pain, he insisted they needed to inform Brianna about what happened, to prepare her. But the paramedics focused on saving his life, paying little attention to his concerns about his employer. During the ride to the hospital, Samuel thought about the future. He was determined to continue fighting by Brianna's side once he recovered. She deserved justice and happiness, and he intended to help her achieve it in any way he could. Though the physical pain was severe, Samuel's spirit remained unbroken. He felt hope growing again that together they would overcome this. Despite his serious injuries, Samuel remained determined to support Brianna's fight. As the paramedics worked to stabilize him, He kept thinking that this battle wasn't over, that those men wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But he was determined not to give up as long as he had strength to fight. He repeated his promise to help Brianna, preparing for whatever came next with a strong spirit despite his adversity. He was determined to stand by her side always.
Hours later, after failing to secure money at the bank, I returned home prepared to face Jeremy's debt collectors. However, they didn't appear while I was at home. Determined to confront Jeremy and resolve everything at once, I examined the documents further and noticed some strange information that led me to an address where he might be. With determination and strength, I drove to the upscale neighborhood where my husband might be staying. With each step, my inner anger and pain grew stronger. As I gripped the steering wheel tightly, I told myself I couldn't let him go unpunished. I kept telling myself I had to do something, had to face that man. When I arrived at the address, I parked the car and took a deep breath before getting out. The house stood imposingly, reflecting the luxury and comfort Jeremy was enjoying at my expense. I walked to the door and rang the bell, feeling my heart rate increase. I was determined to show him I wasn't weak and make him pay for what he had done. I told myself I would make him listen to me and return my money. I wasn't going to face those creditors alone. When the door opened, Jeremy's surprised expression quickly turned to contempt. He asked me what I was doing there and how I had found him, his voice full of disdain. He sneered that if I had come to plead my sorrows, it was useless, that I had wasted my time coming there, and that I still didn't understand he wanted nothing from me. In all our years together, he had never spoken to me like this. I felt my blood boil at my husband's tone. I kept my voice strong as I told him I had come demanding answers. I told him angrily that he had ruined my life and was living as if nothing had happened, that he had thrown my life into chaos. Jeremy laughed, a cold, cruel sound. He mocked me, asking if I really thought he would waste time with me. He ridiculed me, saying I had always been simple and asking if I hadn't realized I had already lost. I felt tears threatening to come, but I held them back. With determination, I told him I wouldn't give up. I promised him he would pay for everything he had done. Jeremy took a step forward, closing the distance between us. In a threatening tone, he told me to listen carefully, that I had nothing left while he had everything he needed. He sneered that I had no power to change anything, that nothing here was in his name, so I had no rights. He suggested that if I were smart, I should leave, saying he never wanted to see me again. I felt a chill down my spine but refused to back down. Looking straight into his eyes, I told him I would fight with everything I had and wouldn't let this stand. I declared that he had no right to these things and wouldn't get away with ruining my life without consequences. Jeremy laughed again, even louder this time. Shaking his head, he called me pathetic. He cruelly pointed out how foolish I was to think I could start over or win, that I was nothing without him, that he didn't care about me, and that actually, no one cared about me. Though I felt humiliated, I also felt flames of anger and determination rising within me. I kept my voice strong as I told him I was stronger than he imagined, and I would prove it. Jeremy's anger seemed to be growing. In an icy voice, he ordered me to get out. He warned me that I didn't belong there, and if I kept interfering, things would get worse for me. He nearly closed the door in my face. Though I felt the clear threat, I refused to be intimidated. With conviction, I told him I wouldn't stop until I got justice. I spoke with strength and determination, promising he would pay for what he had done. Jeremy stepped back and opened the door wider. He told me I was irritating him and threatened to call security. He warned me to leave before he really lost his patience. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't go without leaving one final message. With a defiant look, I told him this wasn't over. I promised we would meet again, and when we did, I would be even stronger. Then I turned and began walking back to my car. Though I felt the weight of Jeremy's words, I also felt a new determination. As I started the engine, I thought to myself that he might despise me, but I wouldn't let that defeat me. I would keep fighting for myself and for everyone who believed in me. As I drove home, I knew a long battle still lay ahead, but I was more determined than ever to win. I arrived home emotionally exhausted after my confrontation with Jeremy. The heavy silence of the house greeted me as I walked in, his cruel words still echoing in my mind. I knew I needed to focus on finding a solution to this mess, but it was so hard to think clearly. I won't let him destroy me, I whispered to myself, trying to gather my strength. I had to fight, but I felt so alone in that moment. As I was trying to organize my thoughts, the phone rang. My heart jumped, expecting another threatening call from the debt collectors. Hello? I answered, my voice tense with anxiety. A stranger's voice responded, telling me they were calling from the hospital. My blood ran cold when they said Samuel had been brought in critical condition and I was listed as his emergency contact. Samuel? What happened to him? I asked, my voice trembling as fear gripped my heart. The woman explained that he had been attacked by 2 men. She told me he was in critical but stable condition and urged me to come as soon as possible. My legs felt weak, but I managed to tell her I would be right there. During the drive to the hospital, I was overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. It's all my fault that Samuel got hurt, I thought as tears welled up in my eyes. He had always been there for me, and his life was in danger because of me. The weight of guilt was crushing, but it also ignited a new flame of determination within me. I swore to myself that I wouldn't leave him alone and would do everything possible to help him recover. When I reached the hospital, I rushed to the reception desk and identified myself. I pleaded with them to let me see Samuel immediately, explaining that I was his emergency contact. The receptionist checked her records and told me he had been brought in several hours ago. After a moment, she directed me to his ward, informing me he was in the ICU in critical condition. She assured me the doctors were doing everything they could to help him. Following her directions, I made my way to the ICU. The sight of Samuel lying there, surrounded by tubes and monitors, nearly brought me to my knees. It was devastating to see him like this, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I approached his bed and softly said that I was there with him. I apologized profusely for what had happened to him. Samuel struggled to open his eyes and tried to form a smile. In a weak voice, he told me not to worry about him. He whispered that he would be fine, that we needed to stay strong, and that he would survive. Even in his pain, he seemed more concerned about me than himself. I took his hand, feeling his determination despite his suffering. I'll do anything necessary, I promised, squeezing his hand while apologizing again for causing him such trouble. I assured him we would get through this together. Samuel nodded slightly before closing his eyes again. In barely a whisper, he told me not to worry about him, saying I was strong and persistent. He urged me not to let them defeat me. As I watched him, I felt my guilt transforming into an unstoppable force. I knew then that I couldn't let those men go unpunished. I would make Jeremy and his accomplices pay for everything they had done. Though I knew the fight would be difficult, my determination to seek justice had never been stronger. When the nurse announced that visiting hours were over, I had to leave. Before leaving the hospital, I spoke with the doctors to better understand Samuel's condition. They explained that recovery would take time and care. However, they assured me that despite his serious injuries, he was strong and would recover. I requested copies of his test results, and the doctor provided me with a complete report. I thanked them and promised to do everything possible to help Samuel's recovery. Just as he had always looked after me, I was determined to take care of him now. Back in my car, I felt the heavy weight of responsibility on my shoulders, but I also had a new clarity about what needed to be done. I couldn't let injustice win, I thought as I drove home. I would fight for Samuel, for myself, and for everyone else Jeremy had hurt. When I got home, I began organizing my next steps. I knew I needed to gather all possible evidence to make them pay for what they'd done. With the medical reports and everything else I had, I believed I could prove what had happened. Though the battle was far from over, I was more determined than ever to win. As I organized documents and made plans, I thought about Samuel and everyone else counting on me. I swore to myself that I wouldn't let them down. I woke up the next morning with a new determination burning in my heart to fight back and make Jeremy pay for everything he had done. I knew justice was within reach if I didn't give up. Rising early, I was determined to move forward with my plan to seek justice. I carefully organized all the documents I had gathered, contracts, bank statements, and now Samuel's medical reports. Today is the day, I thought to myself as I placed everything into a folder. I was going to the police station, and I wouldn't leave until I got answers, no matter what that lawyer had said. When I arrived at the police station, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. I approached the front desk and introduced myself. I told them I needed to speak with someone about fraud and assault. The receptionist looked at me with interest and led me to a detective. In the detective's office, I began explaining my situation. I handed over the documents, explaining how my husband Jeremy had stolen from me, forged documents, and left debts in my name. I also told them about his involvement in the attack on my friend Samuel, who was in critical condition in the hospital. The detective examined the documents, clearly impressed by the amount of evidence. He told me this was a very serious situation that needed thorough investigation. He called in another officer to help me file a formal complaint. As I filled out the paperwork, I explained everything in detail, from the financial betrayal to the attack on Samuel. I insisted they needed to arrest these men before they hurt more innocent people. The officer nodded, carefully recording everything. He promised they would do everything possible to ensure justice was served. After filing the complaint, the detective advised me to seek out a lawyer who specialized in fraud and financial crimes. He explained that I would need legal help to prosecute Jeremy and recover what was legally mine. He offered to recommend a trusted lawyer who had helped with similar cases. I felt relieved hearing this. I thanked the detective, telling him I was ready to do whatever was necessary. At the law office, I was greeted by a man with a serious but friendly expression. He introduced himself as Sean, explaining that the detective had told him about my case. Sean promised to help me achieve justice. I explained my situation again and handed over my documents and Samuel's medical reports. I told him that I had gathered all available evidence. I explained that I needed help prosecuting Jeremy and recovering my money. Sean carefully analyzed the documents. After a while, he told me that my case was strong. He explained that we could prove the fraud and link Jeremy to the attack on Samuel. He said he would prepare legal measures to freeze Jeremy's hidden assets and recover what was rightfully mine. I felt a wave of relief and hope wash over me. I thanked Sean emotionally, telling him I didn't know what I would have done without this help. As Sean began preparing the legal documents, I felt more confident. Watching him work, I knew I was on the right path. I silently renewed my commitment to fight until the end. Sean interrupted my thoughts to tell me we needed witnesses. He asked if I could contact the friends I had mentioned who knew about Jeremy's plans. I nodded, telling him I would talk to them. I acknowledged that some might regret not telling me sooner, but I needed their help now. Leaving the law office, I felt a new sense of purpose. Walking down the busy street, I thought about how we were one step closer to justice. I knew Jeremy wouldn't escape this time. I took out my phone and began calling friends and acquaintances who could testify against Jeremy. I knew I needed everyone's help. Together, I believed we could win. Back home, I began organizing information and preparing the witnesses. As I checked the details, I promised myself this would work. I had to believe in myself. Failure wasn't an option. The battle had just begun, but my determination was unshakable. Several weeks later, Samuel had fully recovered from the brutal attack. His resilient spirit and determination to help me had been crucial to his recovery. I never stopped fighting while staying by Samuel's side. Together, we continued gathering evidence with Sean, preparing for the lawsuit against Jeremy. I took Samuel's hand, telling him how happy I was to see him recovering. His strength gave me strength, I told him. Having Samuel by my side made me feel more confident than ever. We reviewed all the collected documents, testimonies, and evidence together. Samuel declared with determination that everything was ready and Jeremy wouldn't be able to escape. I nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. I said firmly that we would go to court and make justice prevail. We couldn't let him go unpunished. A few days later, the day of the trial finally arrived. Samuel and I entered the courthouse where Sean was waiting for us. Sean greeted us with an encouraging smile, saying this was the day to reveal the truth and ensure justice. I took a deep breath and entered the courtroom with determination. During the trial, Sean meticulously presented all the evidence. Each document, statement, and Samuel's medical reports were shown to the judge. Sean declared that Jeremy had not only deceived his wife, but was also involved in a corruption that harmed countless people. I watched with growing tension. Jeremy sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, maintaining an indifferent expression, but his face began to change as the evidence mounted. When the witnesses were called, my friends and acquaintances testified cooperatively, revealing details that made Jeremy's situation even worse. One witness testified that Jeremy had always been manipulative and controlling, using me and everyone around him for his own benefit. The most shocking moment in the trial came when Sean presented evidence of Jeremy's corruption. Bank documents, recordings, and testimonies from other victims revealed the full extent of his illegal activities. Sean explained that Jeremy had used my money to fund his fraud scheme and bribe officials. He emphasized that Jeremy was neck-deep in this corrupt system. The judge listened carefully to all evidence and testimony. When Jeremy's turn came, he attempted to defend himself, but his words were weak and inconsistent. He declared it was all a conspiracy against him, a fabrication, a lie, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. I watched with mixed feelings of relief and tension. I thought to myself that the truth was finally coming to light, and justice had to prevail. After hours of testimony and evidence presentation, the judge finally prepared to deliver the verdict. The judge declared Jeremy guilty on all charges. He announced that Jeremy would serve prison time and all his assets would be confiscated and returned to me. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks as relief and triumph washed over me. We had done it. Justice had finally prevailed, I thought as I hugged Samuel. Along with Jeremy's conviction, the debt collectors who attacked Samuel were also arrested. The evidence linking them to Jeremy's corruption was enough to secure their convictions. Sean expressed his satisfaction, saying they would all pay for what they had done. He said justice had won. I felt overwhelming gratitude toward everyone who had helped me. I thanked Sean, telling him that he had made all this possible. When I returned home, I began rebuilding my life with the certainty that the worst was behind me. Samuel stayed by my side, helping me every step of the way. He smiled and called me a warrior. I smiled back, feeling stronger than ever before. I told him he was my hero, and I didn't know what I would have done without him. With my property recovered and justice served, I finally felt at peace. Looking around my house, I thought about how we had overcome so many difficulties, but we had succeeded. This was my victory. Our victory. I knew that with Samuel by my side and the support of friends and family, I could face any future challenges.
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates us to deliver moving stories to you almost daily. Don't miss the next astonishing story that will soon be displayed on the screen. I'm deeply grateful that you're here. You can now click on the links displayed on the screen. There are many valuable stories and enjoyable content that I've specially selected for you. I'll see you there.